Okay, moving on to our second session, and thank you again to Jennifer Korber. Our second session is with Chris Stacy Bates, Aaron Thomas, and Kara Stone. They are going to talk about teaching Primo to every student, incorporating Primo instruction into an online literacy course. Chris Stacy Bates is a science and technology librarian at Iowa State. She teaches and serves on the curriculum planning group for the first year information literacy course, which she took herself as a student at ISU. She co-chairs a committee on improving the local user experience with library discovery systems and liaises with several engineering and science departments. Chris enjoys breaking library databases by finding unusual problems with search results and displays. She is happy to provide suggestions on customizing and teaching Primo, coordinating library instruction with changes to resources, and yarn bonding book carts. Erin Thomas is a science and technology librarian at Iowa State, where she teaches the first year information literacy course, manages the library's standards collection, and liaises with the departments of mechanical engineering and material science and engineering. It is her sincere hope that this work will endear her to our future robot overlords. Kara Stone is an instruction librarian at Iowa State, where she works with the first year information literacy course and liaises with the School of Education. Prior to joining ISU, she worked as the coordinator of information literacy and user experience librarian, at Grandview University. She has served in leadership roles in Iowa's library associations and has presented at several conferences, including the annual conference on the first year experience, the Council of Independent Colleges Information Fluency, and the Disciplines Workshop LOEX, and the Midwest Archives Conference Fall Symposium. And I'll just say it now before we get all the questions, the slides and the videos will be posted hopefully next week, and registrants will receive notification when that happens. Thank you, and go ahead and get started, please.
All right, so thank you all for taking the time to be here. We know that you can make a lot of choices with your day, and so thank you for sharing this time with us. Each of us will share our name before we jump into our section of the presentation, and we'll be accepting questions at the end, so we'll address those at the very end. This is Kara speaking first, and since 2011, ISU has used Primo as its federated discovery tool and its only public access catalog. Like other colleges and universities, we teach course-related instruction sessions that include an introduction to Primo. But unlike others, we also teach a 1-credit information literacy course that's required for all of our undergraduate students. So Library 160 is a half-semester hybrid course with minimal face-to-face contact. The textbook and assessment pieces have to stand alone, and they're incorporated into our learning management system, which is Canvas, which you heard mentioned before. And that way our students have a one-stop shop for all of our materials. Our online textbook is open access and is published by our digital press, which we link to here in the chat and in our slides later. Typically, our students enroll within their first year for this course. And so even when students aren't necessarily doing research-related projects at the same time as Library 160, there are reasons for our students to be motivated to do this class and be part of this work. So it is a satisfactory fail course. So if the students fail, it does negatively impact their GPAs. So that's pretty good extrinsic motivation right there. And also because it's required for graduation, that's a good reason for them to stay focused on completing the work. So those two things combined are those extrinsic motivators. And then we have the faculty expectations for our students to move forward in their major coursework with this foundational knowledge of research and information literacy. So we'll touch more on this later, but our learning management system is helpful not only for serving as that central hub for our course, but also helping us keep track of and stay on top of any students who may be struggling with deadlines or motivation. By having this class be required, typically early in a student's studies, it allows us the luxury of digging deeper with more subject-specific instruction, building on that foundation that they had from Library 160 when they're doing some later course-related instruction with us.
All right, so this is Erin. As mentioned in my bio, I'm primarily a liaison librarian when I'm not teaching Library 160, and I really benefit from having this required course when I'm doing my course-related instruction. I don't need to spend time on the really basic mechanics of how the search interface works or what students can expect to find in general using Primo, because that's already been covered. so I can focus on subject-specific stuff that's weird that they might need to know more about as engineering students, such as how to find things in our standards collection. These come from a local database that's imported into Primo. The records look weird. They're a little more challenging to find than other materials. So it's great that I can have more time to focus on that instead of how do you find a book, things like that. So in Library 160, what do we cover? We cover what you can find with Primo. So what does it search? Not just books. We cover search strategies. So using Boolean operators, doing nesting, truncation, phrase searching, starting with a simple search and then tweaking your results or using advanced search instead, refining your search results, identifying and using elements of the results list so you know what you're looking at, what you're getting, things like that. In advanced search, we teach not only that it exists, but what fields are, how to use the drop-down options to control your search and know exactly what's happening, as well as how to understand and interpret an item record and how to locate physical items in the library. So that's in our first chapter on finding stuff in the library. We have a second one that covers finding articles, in which Primo also plays a role. So in that chapter, we discuss how you use Primo to find articles, which again involves tweaking your results, as well as understanding what you're seeing in the search results, but also availability and full text of items, how to understand that and how to actually get to the full text from Primo, as well as how to identify peer-reviewed materials with Primo. We don't just cover how to use it, we talk about the strengths and weaknesses. So we ask students to compare Primo to things like Google Scholar or subject indexes in terms of coverage and understand that they're different. This is also the chapter where we teach students about interpreting citations, particularly how to understand the parts of a citation in order to find an item in the library. So we emphasize, for example, that Primo is the source for books in our collection. So we talk about understanding which citations are for books, and for book chapters, for example, that you'll need to know to look for the book instead of the chapter level information in order to find the book that the chapter is in. And all of these chapters, both of these ones and the others in our textbook, include guided practice in a variety of formats. So things like flashcards, drag and drop activities. We ask them to put books in call number order. And we have some LibWizard tutorials that we also use. So in general, we focus on teaching the students things that they can use in Primo with great success, but that they can also take into other search tools later on and will also work there. So things like understanding and choosing a scope, knowing that you can limit by material type, choosing whether simple search is fine or whether you need to do a more advanced search and understanding how to do that. Identifying the types of items that you're getting in your search results and maybe why that is. We teach that facets are there and broadly what you can do with them, but we don't teach the specifics because those change from interface to interface and over time. We also cover finding materials once they're identified, both full text online and physical items in our building. Just general approaches and skills that are transferable, not step-by-step, because that can change. So this is all the foundational stuff that you can build upon later.
Okay, and this is Chris. There are other features of Primo that we explain more selectively, such as selecting an online source when several are offered. So we do teach students that they can see a range of choices displayed in the full record, or that they can just click full text available from the summary results list to jump right to one option. We show them that they can try another option, thus if the first fails, but we don't really get into explanations of what the ranking is and why some things will come before other choices. For Ferber, we do mention that items get grouped with similar versions and alternate editions, and how to see all the members of that group. But we don't get into how the grouping happens or take time to distinguish this from the different method for deduplicating records in Primo Central. We also mentioned that we have a multitude of ways to request items, such as, is this in the library or is it checked out currently? Is it available from one of our partner libraries? Does it need to be requested from interlibrary loan, etc.? We do definitely try to make them aware of interlibrary loan, and that if something's not available immediately, it's still available, but the exact details of how the linking works changes enough that we don't step by step their way through that. I've worked with Primo and instruction since we've implemented Primo here, and so I've seen a number of changes to how we teach Primo over time. Many of our changes to the search strategies that we emphasize in teaching are due to updates made by Ex Libris to Primo, like the need to teach new features or interfaces. And especially through having a course, we're very aware that when the displays and search options available to our patrons change, we also have to change the examples that we present, such as using new screenshots in our textbook or picking different example records to demonstrate new functions effectively. Over time, we have moved to de-emphasize approaches that relate to subject standardization due to the lack of this standardization in records that come from Primo Central. Some sources use author-provided keywords, some use terms from a database's thesaurus, but of course no thesaurus exactly matches any other. We can no longer teach students to expect library catalog records to all have subject headings from LCSH. And similar issues apply for author names. So we no longer teach browse searching in Library 160. We are even reevaluating whether to teach subject heading searches at all. Refinements to the search algorithm mean that we can focus less on the order of search terms, such as phrase searching or starts with, to get the most pertinent results, because relevance ranking tends to push these to the top of the list automatically. And we keep adding Primo coverage of local collections beyond our catalog. These now include our digital repository, print standards, as Erin mentioned, and more detailed records for our special collections materials, among others. So here's one example of how we've had to change one of our quiz questions. The search structure we used for Primo used to be one search box with drop-down menus for a choice of item type, keyword arrangement, and field to be searched. Students tended to select a field to search, but then add keywords that didn't match that field. Like they'd select the subject field with search terms calculus and Chen, where Chen is an author name, and of course they'd find no results. So we wrote a quiz question showing that any field limit needs to apply to all the keywords in that search box, or else they should search anywhere in the record. And now with our current Primo interface, you can't anymore limit your field in simple search. And the advanced search layout in the lower right here makes it more obvious that you can search some keywords in one field and some in another. We've still kept the quiz question that addresses field searching in more than one field, but now it's become much less clear to students why this matters. So we'll probably drop it and replace it with a more relevant quiz question. One thing that's been very helpful to us is to spend some time thinking about how we coordinate administering Primo and planning our teaching. So it's been very helpful that we maintain some member overlap between our Primo oversight group, our instruction department, and within that department and other librarians that do teaching, our Library 160 curriculum planning group. Also, we usually make sure to schedule Primo changes between terms for consistency, whether that be consistency within a term of Library 160 in particular, or just between when someone like Erin does course-related instruction, and then the students should be able to expect Primo to look similar as over the next couple of months they accumulate sources for their final paper or project. It's convenient that often when we do need to change something in the textbook for the course at short notice, it's often just one screenshot or sentence. So having a locally hosted online textbook means that we can fix small issues almost instantly. Obviously, having Primo for our main search tool affects both what and how we teach. So we teach Primo as a choice, but not the only choice for finding articles. As Erin mentioned, we also want them to be aware of subject-focused article indexes in Google Scholar. And we use consistent terms and names for Primo and its functions. We only call it Quick Search on our library website and in most of our instruction, though in Library 160, we also make clear that Quick Search is an example of the library discovery tool category. And among staff, we certainly call it both Quick Search and Primo, most often Primo, since that's, of course, the ex libris name for their product. Planning for instruction, conversely, affects our choices about which Primo options and customization we've adapted. We've selected Simple Search as our default for simplicity and for a more compact and usable library homepage. And in our search results, we default to just showing those items that are owned or accessible locally. So the Expand My Results button is displayed, but it's not selected unless the patron chooses. So items that are not available locally in print or online in full text are not shown unless the patron chooses to explore farther. I think of this as the what can a freshman get for her paper that's due tomorrow set of results available with that button unselected. We've had a couple different versions of location within the library plugins that we've used, and these have been very helpful for students, even though we've had some recent stack shifting projects that again meant our examples needed constant updates. And we work to carefully plan both the placement and the description of customizable functions, such as how we link to our partner libraries and interlibrary loan, and how we give descriptions for those things, where and how we set up report a problem forms, and so on.
So this is Kara again. How do we know that this is working, right? As we mentioned earlier, we do quizzes and exams, and those are through our Canvas tool. And we use that data to figure out what do our students know in terms of the content that we're delivering. So quizzes can give students a bit of incentive to do some hands-on practice because we have questions designed for them to go out into Primo and search for different things given the prompt. I will note that on the final exam, any questions related to searching, we use screenshots rather than having them go out to use Primo directly because it is a high stakes, high pressure situation. And we want to make sure that the questions are stable and that there aren't any glitches there. We use Canvas Analytics to track student progress and assess the effectiveness of our question design. And in terms of student evaluations, our responses are generally positive. Students are asked about whether materials are clear and understandable, whether the quizzes help their learning, whether the online course readings were effective. And we also look at about how students feel, how confident they are in their abilities to locate books, journal articles, whether they think the information will be useful in their future studies, and whether the course challenged them to learn more than they expected. Generally speaking, our responses to these questions tend to be agree or strongly agree, and the course pass rate tends to be between 95 and 96%. This class also helps be a point of contact for some future research projects for students. So some students may come in for individual library consultations. They might become our library frequent flyers, as I like to say, or we hear from them maybe a semester or two later about how they've built on the skills from our class or other course-related instruction and incorporated their research into their course projects.
So this is Erin again. One example of how we might do this in a way that is less formal, but still useful for assessing what students are getting out of our sessions and our classes is something that I do with the mechanical engineering students that I work with, which is I meet with their classes early in the semester. I build on the Library 160 content to help them find materials for their design projects. At the end of the semester, these students, maybe they've come in between the beginning and end of the semester to consult with me. Maybe they haven't, but they all present posters and their prototypes at an end of semester expo. So this is not necessarily directly related to Library 160, but they have met with me, and they usually get really excited to see me when I come back to the expo to find out how their projects went, and they share really useful feedback with me. So maybe it's how they found a handbook on exactly the type of thing they were designing, and it had the exact equation that they needed for their write-up, or they were able to find the standard that their industry partner wanted them to use. And they're usually really excited about that. They also tell me what they hope to find and didn't, which is really useful for knowing what to improve for next time. Sometimes it's things that I can take back to the department to get course-related instruction in an earlier class, or I can take back to the other folks on the Library 160 curriculum group, and we can work on updates to that class as well.
So now it is time for questions, and we are, boom, right on time, 20 minutes. So what questions can we answer for you? One of the ones in the chat was, how would a Primo specific course like this be affected were you to switch to a new discovery system? Well, hopefully we don't anytime soon, because even though it's been a little while, I feel like we're good, right? So that would just mean incorporating a few new procedures here and there, but generally speaking, the information literacy concepts that we teach transfer across to multiple systems. So.
Another question is, I like that you can link to digital resources. Do you often also link to open materials? Oh, and this is Chris again. Not only do we link to open materials, we have a strong emphasis on understanding what open access and open materials are in what's currently our second chapter of the textbook and exercises. Have we made plans on how CDI might affect our teaching of Primo searching? We don't expect it to have a big impact because we don't really get too far into the specifics of why students are seeing what they see through Primo Central. So CDI will be maybe some incremental changes, but we don't expect it to really affect what we need to emphasize for larger points in the course. A quick question on what plugin we use for stack location now. That is StackMap. And it has been pretty easy to use. We're really loving the fact that we get a little Google Maps type pointer to approximately where on a given floor the range of shelves with a book would be. Which course management system do we use? We use Canvas. And we migrated to Canvas a couple of years ago, so we had some changes from our previous system, Blackboard, but it's been pretty manageable, and definitely the general idea of being able to give quizzes, having access to ungraded tutorials and so forth has been consistent through that change.
Let's see here.
We're using Alma along with Primo. There was a question on which ILS we're using.
Yeah.
If you see that I've missed one that you've already answered, just feel free to go ahead and mark it answered so I don't.
We've got so many great questions, it's hard to choose. A recording will be available after I can answer that question.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, insofar as we ceased teaching browse searching, how to help students discover the terms that are being used in the records so that they can have more precision in their searching. We do still have them identify subject terms both in Primo records and in article index records. But because of the fact that searches through Primo are not going to find everything that's of interest having consistent subject terms, that's where we're still thinking about what's the most effective way to get at the general approach without overemphasizing that there's going to be the idea that there's going to be one perfect subject search rather than you'll need a cluster of subject searching to get everything.
So one question was, what was the process like, and there are a couple of questions along those lines, to negotiate creating or having this required course with our faculty and with our administrators? And I will let Chris handle that one because she has our institutional knowledge.
All right. So the biggest portion of this work was done decades ago, actually. In the introduction, it was mentioned that I took this class as a freshman. That was in 1987, and it had already been required for some number of years before that. However, about 10 years ago, our library dean and research and instruction associate dean were very active in a switch. The course used to be worth half a credit, and now it's worth a full credit due to their efforts to demonstrate to the provost and the faculty senate that yes, we really do have a full credit's worth of content in the course. So even without having to add much more content than we've been having before, we were able to prove that there really is a lot of content in this course. Also, an even longer change over time, this course used to involve things like a library scavenger hunt, where things were just incredibly specific to just making sure students got to various places around our building. And we've definitely turned it over the years into a much more transferable skills information literacy course.
There was a question about, on the FAQ for the LibGuide for the course, about addressing misconceptions about the course and the pass-fail rate, and perhaps students gaining some notoriety among students, or students being nervous to take the course. So when you teach a course to the entirety of your university population of students enrolled, there are some misconceptions that float around, and often we're able to put some people's minds and hearts at ease during our opening session with our students, where we talk about, yeah, if we do have 100 people in the room, there are only going to be like 5 or 6 or 4 or 5 rather that won't pass the class, and we talk about the reasons why that happens. So if we're looking at sheer volume of students and numbers, raw numbers, it might look like, oh my gosh, a lot of people are failing this course. But in terms of actual functionality of the course, when it's a 96% pass rate, it's pretty good. And then the students are like, oh, okay, I get it now. I feel better about this. So
there's a question that Erin can take, that someone notes that many of our engineering resources are not in Primo, so I don't teach Primo to them. Is this different for you?
So for me, it's a little bit different because I work with mechanical engineering students that need to use our standards collection, and that's only searchable in Primo for them. So I have to teach it for that. But I also teach lots of other things in my sessions with them. So some Primo, some other things like subject-specific databases that we have like Compendex, and so on.
A question on, do you have a traditional library catalog available to search in addition to this discovery tool? The answer to that is no, but we did do that between 2008 and 2011. We had both a traditional library catalog and access to all those records as part of our early implementation of Primo. 2011 is the date when everything became available just through Primo in terms of local collections.
So we're going to continue for another 2 or 3 minutes. Would you like to let people know how to contact you with questions? Because I don't think we're going to get to all 20 open questions.
Oh my gosh, yes. We're so excited that there's so many. So this is Kara speaking again. Our emails are on this slide. Also, our slides, we included some hidden slides with more detail from the things that we talked on as well. So a lot of that will be there. Feel free to pop us emails. We're definitely happy to field any questions that you might have for any of us. And we're just so grateful that you took the time today to spend it with us, for us to share what we're doing, but also we're excited to learn from you throughout the rest of today. So thank you so much.
Okay, if there's time, if you want, you can try to take one or two more easy ones if you want to try to, but it's up to you.
Okay. Questions is, did we provide additional training to other library departments, such as archive, circulation, and reference, as they interact with patrons? We did do some of this in terms of one-time trainings that were essentially geared to what can you expect from Primo that's different than what you've been able to expect from a traditional library catalog, or for new colleagues coming to Iowa State who hadn't used Primo elsewhere, what might be different from their library catalog or other discovery tools. So that does get into a mix of more of the, why do we see results like this? What are the sources of the different records that pop up? And so definitely our staff training does more about including some of the information about why this is happening, along with what can I expect? How do I, say, limit things to fit the patron's question?
Okay, thank you all very much for your time. Because we have another session starting, we have a 10-minute break. We will try to get started as close to 11:10 as possible with the next session. If your question did not get answered, the slides will be up with the contact information for these panelists. And thank you all for your time, and thank you in particular to our panelists.
Thank you so much.